Okay, this is going to be video number 2 of the series, and we're going to be discussing engine preparation. Now, you notice I've stripped the car out. That's actually a first tip here. Now, if you live in a rural area or have land, you can test run your car, but I live in the city, so basically I'm not going to strip the car out until I've tuned the motor. So that's just one thing, remember that I know you want to start breaking glass and hear the motor loud, but I can still take this car down the road and test the tranny or anything. All that's been done. It's just tips for you to, be able to make sure that it runs and drives. And then some other tips. Now, this is a Buick 350. It's got some issues. It doesn't make it the great derby motor real close to the steering. So I'll keep this for maybe a bomber project or other projects, but I'm not going to go that crazy with it. Now, let's say this is a Chevy 350 or something you want to keep derbying. There's a few things you might want to do. You might want to do a compression check to make sure that it's a decent motor to spend any time or money on. And then going from there, if you're going to just, do more to it later, well, a few things you might want to do besides, and I'll get into what I'm going to do in this motor second, but you might want to do a timing chain. If it has lots of miles on it, good chance the timing chain could break in the derby and do a lot of damage to the motor. So that's something to look into. Plus, maybe you might want to fix the oil leaks so you also don't lose any oil or oil pressure, anything like that, or even freeze plugs. You might want to check more stuff like that out. But on this engine, since all I'm going to do is run it once, hopefully the motor survives. I'm not going to go crazy with it. But so the only things I'm going to really do to it is fuel pump to make sure I got plenty of fuel. This water pump is bad, but I'll give you a reason why you want to change a water pump anyways if it's iffy. This water pump basically is the center of all pulley belts. So when a water pump goes bad, the bearings go bad and the pulley tends to wobble and it'll shoot the belts, and it can cause more problems. Even if you can keep going, you'll lose power steering, you'll lose your alternator, and your batteries die faster. So that's the main reason I'm changing, besides this water pump is shot, so I know it's no good. I always change the water pump out. Now, as you can see, then next step is, doing your tune-up, plugs, wires, checking everything out. If you do a compression check on your motor, you can check the color of the plugs, nice and tan, indicates the motor's running perfect and great. And then, depending on how bad your car is to start with, you're possibly going to have to do a carb rebuild. This thing has a brand new carburetor on it, so I don't even have to mess with that. But that's something to look into. There's places around here that'll rebuild the carburetor for only $125, so that's a good option. The second thing is this car has AC on it. Doesn't mean nothing on this car, but when you start to go removing components, you got to check how your belts run. Chrysler is particular. This one, the distributor's on top, but on a Chrysler you'll have a old piston type air seat compressor on top. You really can't remove it for derbying because it'll cost you way too much to go find non-AC belts and pulleys. The AC compressor on a Chrysler acts as kind of an idler pulley that all the belts run around, so you're stuck with it. But other than that, and then it's just changing out air filter so it gets plenty of air. I'll go over once I get to it of how I don't like to loop hoses like for the heater hose there. I prefer to make plugs, unscrew them, hopefully find the right pipe fitting. Some motors you can't, and you'll have to use like the little rubber block-off plugs, or you can loop line if you can't. The reason I don't normally loop lines is sometimes when you loop heater lines, you end up bypassing the cooling system and it doesn't go through the engine and doesn't cool right. So that's the first tip, is checking everything out first before you start stripping the car. If you want to save the motor, do a compression check first before you start spending money in it. And now, this motor's pretty clean, but another tip is once you got it running to where you can get it started up and heat it up and spray some engine cleaner on it, you might want to clean the engine off if it's really grimy. The reason being, it's a fire hazard. If your car catches on fire, it just gives something more else to burn, and the fire can spread. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with tranny lines in that. We'll get into that later on when we're actually prepping the car. And next step, since this car runs good, is, and also the only problem I have with this car is you see the battery charger and the voltmeter out. The guy said the alternator is no good. The alternator is fine. It's got a short somewhere. So pretty soon here I'll start getting into wiring. HEI distributors, easy. But I'll start killing the wire. Now you can find a short. One way to find a short is take your battery terminals off, run a ohm meter between it, and read the ohms. And then one at a time, start pulling the fuses out of your fuse block. And once you get the right fuse out, and the ohm meter reads that it doesn't have a current flow issue, or it goes back to 0. You know that's the one, or whatever. It has no resistance. Then you know that's the area where your problem is. This one's probably in the power window since he's got it all wired goofy, but it's not going to matter. So, we'll get into more stuff like later on radiator mounting. But for now, there you go. Basically, there might be, once I start doing the actually tearing into this engine, doing the water pump, I might do a video too for you. There's a few things once you're doing your water fuel pump and that, you just start checking. Most people will run rubber lines for a good reason. First debris I had on a small block Chevy, the alternator was smashed back, shut the fuel line off completely. So run rubber or remove your lines. There you go. One last look at the interior before it starts disappearing, and we'll get into that in a later video. See ya.